go, Chair.
Okay, good morning, councillors, officers, members of the public and press. Welcome to this meeting of Finance and Policy. This is a remote meeting being live streamed on the website and recorded. I will now hand over to Denise Wimpenny, Democratic Services Team.
Thank you, Chair. We'll begin the meeting by way of a roll call of all those in attendance remotely, and may I request that members confirm that they have a paper copy of the agenda and can both hear and see councillors in the meeting. I'll now begin the roll call. Councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher.
Yes, I have a copy of all the papers that I can see and hear everyone.
Councillor Brewer.
Yes, I've got a paper copy. I can see and hear.
Councillor Brown.
I have all the papers. I can hear. I can only see 9 people. I don't know. I noticed Jim Lindridge was on earlier, but I can't see him now. So I'm not seeing everybody, but I don't know if that isn't pretty normal.
Yeah, yes. Not everybody will display on the screen, Paddy. They'll be just at the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Here. Apologies from Councillor Hunter. Councillor Lindridge.
I can see 9 people on the screen. I've got the papers. I can communicate.
Councillor Sue Little. I understand Sue's still having some technical difficulties, so she hasn't joined us yet.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Sue. Sorry, I hadn't realised you joined.
Right.
Oh, great. Councillor Marshall.
So I've got the paperwork and everything. Yeah, lovely.
Councillor Moore.
Yep, I have all the relevant paperwork and can see and hear everybody.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I've got all the paperwork and I can see and hear.
Councillor Tennant.
Yes, I've got all the paperwork and I can see everybody.
And Councillor Young.
Yeah, I've got all the paperwork and can see and hear.
Can I just ask if there are any members joining the meeting I have not called? That now concludes the roll call. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Denise. I guess the way that we run this now, the apologies for absence are pretty much included within the roll call. So we'll move down to declarations of interest by members. Do we have any?
I have. My husband received the £10,000 government grant from the business rate relief tax thing.
Thank you, Councillor Little. Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Chair, do we need to declare if we're a member of the Town's Fund Board?
Good question. Yes, we might as well, just for a point of clarity.
Yeah, just as Chair of Regeneration, I'm a member of the Town's Fund Board under 6.2.
Yeah. That would be the same for myself, though obviously not the Chair of Regeneration. Councillor Young?
Yeah, I'm also a member of the Town's Fund Board.
Thank you. Councillor Akers-Belcher, you want to speak again? No.
Sorry, I just hadn't loaded me hand.
All right, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare that I have applied for some aid. Whether I get any or not is another matter, but I have applied and I do have small businesses within Hartlepool that may just come up in the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
I'm part of the Town's Fund Board.
Thank you. Ordinarily, I'd assist members and lower your hand after you've finished speaking, but my machine isn't working great today. So could I ask that you keep a track of it yourself, and it'll just help me out a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so before we move on to, we're going on to the minutes, aren't we? Are there any questions or comments in relation to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March? No. Any questions or comments in relation to the minutes for the Health and Wellbeing Board on the 2nd of December? And any questions or comments in relation to the minutes for the Safer Hartlepool Partnership held on the 10th of January? Thank you. Are we happy to accept those minutes as read then? Yep. Great. Thank you. So before we move on to item 5.1, there are some confidential papers that are attached to this agenda item. Now, what I would request at this point is if any members have any questions in relation to the pink paper items, just to make the meeting run a little bit smoother with us broadcasting this live, if there are any questions, could you raise them now so that we can potentially move this agenda item to further down the agenda so we're not interrupting the stream? Is there anything? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No? Okay. We'll move on to 5.1 then. That's the social, emotional and mental health special free school. And that will be Denise McGuckin.
I think it's going to be me, Shane, Danielle Swainson.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so I'll kick in if that's all right, Shane.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for the grant of a lease for the new special free school and to seek delegated powers to agree a capital contribution if there is any following a DFE feasibility study. Just a bit of background. So this has mostly been through Children's Services Committee by nature of the fact that it's a free school. So just a little bit of background. We applied for this school in 2018. We found out we were successful. We've been through the process in terms of the DFE approving our bid and then moved to applications being submitted via the DFE in terms of providers. We had 2 providers that have come forward for the free school. We interviewed alongside the DFE. We made a recommendation to the Secretary of State that was accepted, and the provider has been informed that they've been successful. That information is still embargoed, and we've not had any information in terms of timescales about when that embargo will lift. The hope is that we get a significant improvement in education for our social, emotional and mental health needs for children. So moving on to 4.1 just sets out in terms of the discussions that have already taken place with DFE representatives. So we've discussed site, lease terms, the procurement issues and the construction process. Appendix 1 sets out where the site is that was previously shared with Children's Services Committee. The DFE will fund the construction of the school. We have to fund the access to that site, which was agreed at Finance and Policy Committee on the 30th of January. The DFE will start a feasibility study shortly. We're hoping that nothing significant comes out of that. The early discussions are that they feel the site's appropriate and there's no risks around that, but obviously we don't know until we start that feasibility study. We would need to pick up or support any abnormal costs that they would find in part of that feasibility study. It's unknown, obviously, at this stage if there are going to be any of those or if there is, what that would look like. What we're asking for is delegated power to ensure that it can be solved very quickly so that we can get construction underway quickly for the Chair of Finance and Policy and the directors to approve that, which is in the recommendations. So the timescales are on 4.5. Some of this has shifted a little bit due to the COVID situation that we're in at the moment, but we are hoping that we can have the school constructed and open by September 2022. The heads of terms have been agreed with DFE subject to the contract and the lease, which is set out in the confidential appendix. we are continuing to work with DFE in terms of timescales. We're unsure. They are pushing ahead in terms of capital projects, so we're hoping that we can move quite quickly. But obviously, we'll need to just keep an eye on that because we haven't had any firm dates. Financial and legal considerations are set out in the committee report. And I'm asking for members to approve the conclusion of the agreement for the lease on the basis of the heads of terms, and also approving delegated authority to the Chair of Finance and Policy Committee and the Director of Regen and Neighbourhoods. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Danielle. So I've got Councillor Lindridge to come in.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate ourselves or yourselves on getting the funding, securing the funding. It's a great bid. I'm really pleased. It's a good opportunity for the town. It's for the young people with social and emotional issues. I think it's a great step forward. So you've got to congratulate yourself on the bid. I'd like to ask a question on 6.4. Right, you do say that there's going to be costs. There's going to be a saving cost of 40k in placement costs. Obviously, they will be able to have the placements within the town, which saves the stress on parents and things, getting people to, say, Middlesbrough, Stockton or whatever, and the associated costs with that for travel. You've mentioned that you're looking at £15,000 per pupil, a significant amount in travel costs. I'm presuming still that we still have costs to be incurred travelling, say, let's say, for instance, somebody who's travelling from Westview to Golden Flats. We're going to have a reduced cost in that rather than travelling out of the town as well. I take it that's right, is it? Can I just say, on the 1.2 million, when it's fully operational, how did you come to that figure in terms of, was there a period of 5, 10, 15-year span to get that 1.2 saving? Could you just clarify that, please?
Yeah, no problem. The savings based on currently our independent school fees can be between 60 and 70,000 pounds, which are out of town. They're independent providers. So we are hoping that there is a phased approach over 3 years. So the school will build up in terms of different year groups as it builds up to fully being open. We've the school's actually for 50 places, although we think we've only highlighted a need for approximately 30. We will keep an eye on that, but it's likely we'll also be able to sell some of those places in conjunction with some of our other neighbouring authorities. So we're hoping that that saving can be realised within 3 to 4 years of school opening.
Could I just ask a further question there, Chair? Danielle? Yeah. In terms of funding that was an income stream, will that go to the free school at the academy? I'm presuming then that there'd be no extra funding for the council as such, but that would go to the school, would it? Any income that's coming in?
Yeah, so basically the school gets paid on block places, so for the places that they've got. So they get a certain amount for the block places, and then they get top-up funding because these children have got additional needs. So if, say, for example, Stockton or Middlesbrough or Durham wanted to buy a place, they would be paying the fund for that individual child to the academy provider. Yes, it would go direct to the school for them to be able to obviously manage their overheads, etc.
So it's basically the same as we are paying when we sort of outsource our young children.
Yes,
that's fine. See, I think it's a great opportunity for the town. It's smashing for the kids. It's really important that we have as much in-house provision as possible for our young people. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Jim. We've got Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a question with regards to the financial considerations, and it says about a capped contribution for remediation, and and just want to know what figure, are we talking about, like, you know, and where is the money going to come from? And if it's above a certain level, will that then have to come back to committee? Because, like, you know, constitutionally, we have a limit on, like, you know, spend, and normally that would need to come back. And I don't want to go into the details of it, but I'm just interested to know is, have we already made provision for that? And where does it sit within the budget?
There's no provision, Councillor, at the moment. DFE are saying that they don't feel that the site is a risk, but obviously we all know that anything can come up. We've reviewed it, and there's no flooding issues and things like that that the DFE have said have caused issues before on other sites. There is no funding currently allocated to this. So if the costs were significantly prohibitive, it would put a stop on the school. So there's no specific allocation been made. The council have allocated funding to support the access road, but not in terms of if remedial works are needed, which is completely unknown in terms of the costs of that until the feasibility study is done. We're trying to push for the feasibility study to be done as quickly as possible. We were hoping that we could try and get that done by September, but obviously within the current situation that might be slightly optimistic, but we are pushing for at least October. So that then we can have some discussions if there is any remedial work being needed to be done by the site. In terms of the cap, that's not been specified either yet, Councillor. So there's a few unknowns at this point in terms of if there will be any remedial works needed or if there's any funding needed to be found.
Okay. Apologies if I can just come back. It's just that I feel a bit uneasy. I don't have an objection to the recommendation. What I'm uneasy with is it doesn't specify whether there's a cap and whether or not we can agree that's within our constitution limits. And it also doesn't say where the money's going to come from. And I just think that needs clarifying before we need a decision. I think it's a remarkable, like, you know, coup for the town to go ahead. But obviously, from a financial integrity point of view, we need to know where it's coming from.
I think I've got Denise McGuckin wants to come in and help clarify a few bits.
Councillor Rickers is absolutely right. We need to identify a funding for this. Do that one.
Can't hear you, Denise. You'll have to start again. Is your red button pressed?
Denise, you haven't got your microphone down.
I did that again, yeah. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's this headset thing. I can't get used to it. So Councillor Rickers-Belcher is right. We have to identify a funding stream, and once when we've had the surveys done of the site and we've got that information, we will have to come back to finance and policy because we will have to identify funding for it because it's outside the medium-term financial strategy. So that would have to come back here. The point I also wanted to raise is I think Danielle accidentally said the chair of regeneration and neighbourhoods rather than the chair of finance and policy. And I just wanted to make sure that we are reading the recommendation that was in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Apologies, Denise.
Did that ease some of the concerns, Councillor Rickers-Belcher?
Yeah, it's just that it talks about delegation, but I think it just needs to be clarified more within the recommendation what we spoke about today, like, you know, that will be in accordance with the constitution and we need to identify the source and it will have to come back to finance and policy, but I certainly don't have a problem with it.
Okay, so we need to change the hang on, where are we at? Yeah, so it'd be easier to add an additional recommendation, wouldn't it, which states that any delegated decision needs to be done within the limits set by the Constitution, and any deviation from that would need to come back to finance and policy. Is everybody happy with that as an additional recommendation? Can I get somebody to second?
Happy to second.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
Yeah, we're all good. Okay, so with that additional recommendation then, is everybody happy to go with the recommendations as set out in the report? If so, we'll go to Denise, and we'll need to do this as a recorded vote, I think. Is that how we're going to operate these to make
we
sure?
can do, Chair, but if there's no dissent, it's just a matter for the committee, so we can just proceed if there's no dissent.
We'll make it easy then. Is there anybody who does not agree with the recommendation? No? We'll take that as everyone in agreement then. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 5.2, COVID-19 recovery, a sustainable solution to food poverty. And I believe that will be Jill Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present options for addressing food poverty on a sustainable basis, linked to the developing role of the community hubs. As members will be aware, food poverty has been a significant challenge for us for some time, and there's been a commitment to the child and family poverty from Council for a number of years. During the response...
Oh, yeah. Cut out there.
Your microphone's gone off, Jill.
Sorry, apologies. Not sure what happened there. So through the response to the COVID-19 crisis through the community hubs and the Hartlepool Support Hub model, additional needs have been identified in terms of longer term food sustainability, particularly for working families and the working poor, and also over 65s. And the feedback we've had is that lots of people find it difficult to access, find it uncomfortable to access support through things like food banks, because they see that as charity. And for some people, there can be a stigma associated with that support. But we have had lots of feedback from people that they do struggle financially to purchase sufficient food, particularly nutritious food. And we have identified that there could be an option for a longer term solution for those needs. We've identified solutions that are operating elsewhere in the country, where there are schemes that are based on a membership basis, where people are able to access low-cost, sustainable food without it creating a dependency. The key to the success of this in other areas seems to be a delivery through a community hub type model. So it's something that we'd be keen to explore, linked to our own hubs in the centre, north and south of the town. There are a number of statistics in section 5 of the report about how such schemes have operated in other areas. We're aware of a scheme that operates in Manchester that's been very successful, and some of the statistics in the report are from there, and an independent evaluation that's been undertaken by the University of Sheffield. And there are also some feedback from a scheme that operates in Darlington, which operates a similar model. So we believe that such a scheme would meet an identified need, recognising obviously there isn't a one-size-fits-all and a one solution to this problem. We would obviously recognise that this would work in partnership with other organisations in the town that are helping to address food poverty. And for example, we have worked very closely through the COVID-19 response with Hartlepool Food Bank and other providers as well. So we would look at going out to procurement for a scheme that met those requirements. And what we've also recognised is that there are other issues emerging linked to the COVID-19 response around poverty, not just food poverty, but also around fuel poverty, clothing poverty and digital poverty, which has been a particular issue with people being isolated and not being able to access services online. So we would like to do some further work over the next 2 to 3 months to identify other issues in addition to the food poverty issue that we've identified. The Council has recently been advised that there will be further funding made available. £63 million was identified nationally that was announced a couple of weeks ago, and that's specifically for councils to assist households who are struggling to support food and other essentials. So the detail in section 7 sets out that although we haven't had confirmation of our allocation yet, it is anticipated that that funding would enable us to commission a solution of this nature. There's further detail in the report about the potential benefits linked to child and family poverty in terms of the benefits that have been seen from schemes elsewhere. And it's recommended that the committee agree to the development of such a model that will support people experiencing long-term food poverty and approve the funding strategy that's set out in section 7. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Jill. I think from me, no questions that I haven't already asked, but what I like about this scheme and the proposal that's come forward is it's one that is sustainable moving forward. It requires that one-off commitment to pump prime it, but it has a proven track record as running elsewhere in the country where it will sustain itself afterwards. And importantly, it breaks that level of dependency. It allows people or rather gives people back that level of dignity and being able to look after themselves and to provide for their family and feel like they're providing for their family and not living off handouts. And I think it's a great scheme moving forward for us, and I look forward, I hope, for us to be able to agree with this. I had Councillor Mike Young to come in first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a great thing that we're doing. I think to build a strategy around how we help the most needy going forward post-COVID is essential. I think Sue's struggling to hear me. Are you struggling to hear, Sue? Is it working okay? Oh, you can hear me, okay. So it's only Sue. Joy, your phone, Sue. So yeah, I think it's a great scheme. I think it's great to build a strategy like this to support sustainable practical solutions to helping the most needy. I think what we can't do though is exclude local voluntary sector organisations who are already on the ground doing this kind of work. And I would like to suggest that we potentially widen the scope a little bit to, if it hasn't already been, and I'll probably be corrected on this, to include local voluntary sector organisations, and whether that's a separate fund altogether, that's fine. But I think we need to look at all things at the same time. In terms of sustainability, my key question around that is how I appreciate that there'll therefore be a bit of spend by those people who won't be able to afford a full shop if that's the way it's going to work. So I think if it's going to be a reduced payment that people make or families make, I'd like to know how that then turns into a sustainable solution longer term. And I think the last bit is about assets. If there are any assets purchased as part of the £125,000, it would be good to know if there was if it wasn't to be continued, where those assets would land if the project failed for any reason.
Just to respond to those points, in terms of the local voluntary and community sector, when this model's worked successfully elsewhere, it's very much been in partnership with local organisations, so that's something we'd very much want to encourage. We have already had some engagement with the local organisations that are part of the Hartlepool Food Network, and they're very keen to be involved in any solution. So as I said, it's absolutely not a sort of one-size-fits-all, one organisation can provide the solution. I think it's very much about partnership working, and it's been really encouraging actually to see how much commitment there's been from a large number of voluntary sector organisations to work together and be involved. So that's absolutely something that we would want to encourage going forward. In terms of the sustainability of the scheme, how it's operated elsewhere is that there are some one-off costs for the first year in terms of purchasing the van and the costs of a driver while the scheme builds up. But once the scheme's fully established, the membership sort of contributions actually make the scheme sustainable going forward. So detailed in the report, I think, is how it's worked elsewhere is there's a contribution of on average around £7 a week, but because of the nature of the scheme, people actually receive at least £30 worth of food back for that contribution. And it's not just about a sort of food box and people get what they're given, and people do have options about what they want to access. So the scheme elsewhere has been fully self-sustaining after the first year, which obviously is something we'd very much like to see, you know, some one-off funding that actually gives us a long-term sustainable solution. And I think the benefits of doing that link to the community hubs are that we can also link people into things like the community kitchen, into volunteering opportunities. And while people are accessing the hub for one service such as this, we can obviously take that as an opportunity to link people into other services around health and well-being, around financial advice, around adult education and employment opportunities. So we do think that the delivery through the community hub model is absolutely key, really, to getting the maximum benefits from the service.
That's brilliant, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got Councillor Marshall to come in next.
Thank you. Yeah, I do agree with residents going to the hub because they're going to get more of a one-stop shop. And if they do have a stigma about going to a food bank, I think they are the ideal places. Had we thought of like a voucher scheme or a gift card scheme so they can actually go to a supermarket themselves and get what they need? Because it does seem to be working with what the government's done with the free school meals, you know, like over the last few weeks. My only issue is with some of them, I have tried to abuse it, but hopefully we could list everything that they just buy food, essential food, and then that would probably help get rid of some of the stigma. And if we worked with the supermarkets in Hartlepool, I'm sure we could all get along and make sure that it works properly.
I think the issue with that would be the sustainability, because obviously that would require an ongoing financial investment from the council, because we'd have to purchase gift vouchers on an ongoing basis. Whereas what's being proposed, there's a one-off investment for the first year and then there's no cost to the council after that.
Right. Yeah, it's all right. I don't.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to echo some of the positive points people have made about this. It's really good that we are looking towards a long-term sustainable position on tackling food poverty in the town. It's very good that we're looking at it from a point of view of not being a dependent and allowing to give people their independence so that they can go on forward to build their lives and move on, so that we can help people get stronger in their lives rather than consistently having one particular organisation to be dependent upon. I think this is great. I think the work that's gone into this has been very professional, and it's something that I think could be a model that many other authorities across the country may look at Hartlepool and think that they've come up with a really good plan and it works. So I hope that we can be, once again, be a beacon that can show other authorities how this can be tackled.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good step forward, especially during and after COVID. But I think as a town, there was, you know, we had a need for this anyway. So some of what I was going to ask, I think, has been answered in some of the questions that's already brought up. So it's probably a bit of clarification. We have a one-off payment. Sustaining going forward then, for because I'm imagining that one-off payment gets the product to us and then we still have the problem of distributing it. Is that going to be run with volunteers, or we don't distribute it?
The one-off payment, so for the cost for the first year, purchases the van and pays the wages of the driver for the first year while the scheme's being built up. After the first year, the member subscription fees actually cover the cost of the driver and the maintenance of the van. So after the first year, there's no cost to us. The food is delivered to the community hubs. So generally, that's done. In the other models, it would visit one hub per day. So you have a scheme where across the week the food's available from different sources. There are volunteering opportunities for people linked to that. So we already have lots of people who are linked into things like our community kitchen and volunteering. So it does create volunteering opportunities within the community hubs. And we could very much link that to adult education and opportunities for people to get into employment as well. So yes, it does create volunteering opportunities, but we'd also be able to support through our existing community hub staffing as well if we needed to.
Can I quickly come back to that, Chair, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it a whole lot clearer. And so I think I'm right in assuming then that there's a fee. I think we discussed £7, but for that they get a lot more than £7 worth, so they're happy. And the £7 all fund the going forward of it. Is just one more quick question: is there only one opportunity to do this with the company, I guess, at the 125k in question, or is there other opportunities, or I don't know? I guess that's the question.
Lots of the information we've had has been based on that one particular model that started in Manchester, but the conversations we've been having with the local VCS organisations are about how we might do that locally in Hartlepool. So our proposal was to actually offer that as an opportunity that people could put forward proposals for. So it may be that it ends up being one provider, it may be a consortium of providers, but whatever the outcome is, we'd very much want that to be a model that's links closely with our existing VCS organisations and the existing food network, because I think that gives it the best chance of success and the best chance to embed it locally, really.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Akers-Belcher next.
I've got a couple of points to make. The first one is about the recommendations. I know that comes at the end, but there's nothing in the recommendations that actually articulates that we're going to evaluate this, that there's going to be consultation throughout, and that members who are agreeing to something are going to receive something back about the successes of it. It's just agreeing, and it's not really clear that this is a one-off contribution. And what I wouldn't like to do is to be sat here in a year's time for someone to come back and say, well, actually, we need some more money. I think we need to be very clear that it's a one-off contribution. It's about a sustainable model. And the thing that will come back to us is tell us whether it's been successful or not. So I would like more clarity in the recommendation around that. But I have two questions. One's on 11.1, which is about the equality and diversity considerations. And it says that this is going to be embedded in the service model, but we don't actually have a copy of the service model. And I don't know how we're going to embed those equality and diversity considerations in the model. And I would like, some clarification on how that's going to be done, bearing in mind some of our wards across the town, some of the lifelong conditions people have in certain wards, it's over 50%, and it's how we're going to do that. And it's a bit weak saying there's a service model, and I expected to have some sort of appendices saying this is what the model is, because it says we've contacted lots of people in the voluntary community sector, but I know organisations that have delivered our holiday hunger scheme, and there's been no consultation with them at all. And I think what we need to do is go back to who's been delivering holiday hunger successfully across the town and make sure that they are part of the conversation in developing the model if it hasn't been fine-tuned yet. So it was just really whether or not that can be done. And the other item I have is 13.1, and it says there are no asset management considerations. So if there's no asset management considerations for the council, if we are going to fund the purchase of a van, who owns the van? Like, who is going to deliver the model if it's not going to be us? And what happens a year down the line if the model isn't successful and it isn't sustainable and it's an outside organisation and they walk away? Like, you know, what happens to the assets?
In terms of the equality, sorry, going back to the first point. So in terms of evaluation and consultation, obviously, yeah, we can build that in terms of the recommendation. I suppose I assumed that we would feed back to F&P, but obviously that hasn't been specified in the recommendation. So more than happy for that to be included. And we would absolutely want to be able to evaluate and feed back on the scheme. In terms of equality and diversity, those issues would be built into the service specification, which obviously hasn't been finalised as yet because we didn't have approval to go ahead with the model. We would build into that the scheme should be open to everybody across the community, and that particular efforts should be made to engage with those groups that would sometimes be considered hard to reach, and also that any options delivered through the scheme should be sensitive to cultural requirements. So, for example, feedback from other areas is that the supplies can cater for people with different dietary requirements, for people with different cultural requirements. So we would obviously want to build that in to the service specification. In terms of consultation to date, the consultation has been with the members of the Hartlepool Food Network, which is a significant number of voluntary sector organisations, but obviously doesn't cover every organisation in the town that's been involved in the delivery of food. So if we were to go forward with this model, it would be offered as an opportunity to anybody that was interested in being part of that model. So there would be wider consultation going forward. Obviously, that's been somewhat limited to date, but we have had input from a number of those organisations who are supportive of the model in principle, but we would broaden that going forward. And the final point around the asset, apologies, that's an oversight on my part. We would need to pick that up through the legal agreement, the contracted agreement with any successful provider. And I would assume that, as with other assets, there would be a call on that for the council if we'd funded the asset, but we'd need to work that through.
So can I just come back ever so quickly, just on whether or not we can agree that the evaluation and the consultation is built into the recommendation, and also whether or not, once the specification, should we agree it to get today, that to be circulated amongst members of F&P?
Okay. So I've got as an additional recommendation that we would want to make it clear that this is a one-off funding commitment, that we would be sat here again next year looking to add additional funds into it, and that evaluation be fed back to finance and policy. Now, at no point did anybody give a specific time frame. So is there any preference for when you would expect evaluations to come back, or would it be an annual report? Jill, would we have enough information for it to come back in 6 months?
Yes, we could certainly bring back an update in 6 months in terms of progress, and then maybe after that an annual update if that was something that members wanted to carry on receiving.
Yeah, is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay, I've got Councillor Lindridge to come in next.
Thanks, Chair. You hear me?
Yeah.
I think a few of my questions are being answered, you know, either the councillors or they're being sort of put forward. It does sadden me to think that the public, its residents feel there's a stigma in going to a food bank. It's essential, it's a basic need, you know, and I think we have to work really hard on the model to sort of remove that stigma. You look at the community hubs. I was involved with Jim at the TAC in the South Hub on a voluntary basis, setting up the meals on a Wednesdays. That was last year sometime, which was really successful. Really important that we use the hubs, but also picking up Councillor Marshall's point, I think we need the voluntary organisations on board, because I feel personally that there's less of a stigma, if that's the word to use, to encourage people to go there. What I would like to ask is, how do we go about reducing dependency? That's a really difficult one, I think. We say people get dependent on going there for food. How do you actually reduce that? That's the first one. And secondly, how do you actually monitor that? How we actually monitor that and bringing this into the model? So can you answer that, Danielle, please?
In terms of reducing dependency, the idea is that through this, obviously people are making some financial contribution, so it's not a case of a handout, which is what lots of people feel uncomfortable about or feel that there's a stigma about. This is about people feeling that they're contributing, people having some dignity in that, as Councillor Moore referred to at the start. Through this being linked to the community hubs, we would absolutely use it as an opportunity to support people to access other services such as adult education, support into employment, those volunteering opportunities. So we do feel like linking this through the hubs would give more opportunities for people to move away from that dependency and to become more independent. And we would monitor that through obviously knowing who was linked into the scheme and monitoring what their outcomes are. And obviously some people being able to move out of the scheme because actually they've moved into employment, or they've, for people who are already in employment, they've become more sustainable. They've been able to move on into a better paid job, for example. So we would monitor the outcomes for people that access the service.
Could I just follow up on that in terms of dependency side? Have you asked questions, I would like to think so, whether what we class as dependency or whether a resident thinks they're dependent or not on making a contribution? Are you actually saying that if they make that contribution, they don't feel as if they're dependent on that and they can take away that stigma, so to speak?
That's certainly the feedback we've had through the support hub. So through Hartlepool Support Hub in the COVID response, we've been providing people with free food parcels who've needed them, who haven't been able to access shops. And the feedback we've had from lots of people is that they don't want it free. They don't want what they consider a charity or they consider a handout. They want to make a contribution. They want to feel that they're supporting their own family or supporting themselves, although they do recognise that they struggle with that financially. So the benefit of a scheme such as this is that people are making a contribution and feel that they are, but they are actually getting a substantially more food for that contribution than they would be able to purchase themselves. So we've seen from the evidence from elsewhere that people feel more part of their local community if they're joining with the volunteering. They feel that they're contributing, but they're also accessing better quality, nutritious, higher quality food. So there are also outcomes from a health perspective as well.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Little to come in.
Hi, mine's mainly on 5.3 where you said they pay £7 to join the club. What kind of, are we going to be giving them food that's like, give Morrison's an example, wonky veg, where it's not perfect, or is it going to be like a close sell-by date and stuff like that? Is it going to, what kind of class of food is it going to be?
It's from a range of different sources. So looking at the schemes in other areas, some have agreements with the local supermarkets. So some of it is surplus food. For others, it's bulk buy-in, so they can actually buy products direct from suppliers in large quantities. So that would be more for your sort of dried, canned, store cupboard type food, but also have links with local suppliers around fresh food. So it might be links to things like community gardens, community kitchens, allotments, that sort of thing. So there's a range of different options, and that would be developed really locally based on what's available locally and linking in with other voluntary sector organisations. So it's not really a prescriptive model where we could say at the start exactly what the food sources would be, but it is from a range of different sources so that people do get a range of different goods through the scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Young to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to comments that have been raised by Councillor Brown and Councillor Akers-Belcher in terms of the voluntary sector in Hartlepool. And I think one of the things I'd like to raise is that if this goes to another organisation from outside of the town, then we've still got a voluntary sector that will have a part to play with the most needy in the town. And I think what I'd like to do is add to the recommendations, if I can, that as we're exploring this strategy around the spending of 125,000, I think we need to look at a separate allocation of funds for those local voluntary sector organisations who are going to do some of the gap filling and do a lot of the face-to-face stuff with the community, because they're already there. You know, we've got organisations who've got 30 years worth of experience in the town, and I appreciate what Jill's saying about the Food Network and organisations already feeding into that. But I think it would be remiss of us as a council to support one thing wholly and then forget that we have a voluntary sector that is also trying to sustain, that is already working with people in the town, and I think that's something that maybe with a separate recommendation can be looked into in this report.
I think that's a really good point, Councillor Young, and just to draw your attention to, I think 5.8, that we've highlighted that there does need to be some further work done to look at other gaps in terms of the current services that we have in place to address some of those issues around poverty, and to identify any additional areas where we could commission support through the VCS. So I think it's very much recognising that, as you've said, there's a very vibrant and very committed voluntary sector already in the town, and we absolutely want to involve them in this work and recognise that there might be other gaps as well. So potentially there would be something coming back to Finance and Policy Committee in the next couple of months that would look at identifying other gaps and where we could commission additional input there. So absolutely agree with that point. Yes.
Yeah, and sorry, Chair, I agree. I was actually looking at 5.8 when I to make my comments in front of me here. But I think it's about funding, and I think that's the key thing. I think at the end of that, there's got to be a value for that particular piece of outcome, or that outcome itself. Thank you.
I got Councillor Brown to come back, and then if that's all right, we'll make this the last one because we will need to make some headway on the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a very quick one. It's just a quick bit of clarification upon Christopher's amendment. I've got a bit confused with how we're saying that the evaluation will be something that comes back to this forum in 6 months' time, or are we saying that the evaluation needs to be included in the tender, certainly based heavily around sustainability, but not necessarily inclusive to that? If we're not saying that, I would ask, could we make a further amendment to say that anybody going for this process needs that evaluation to make sure that we don't hit a rocky road later on up the road?
Yeah, in terms of the updates, well, my view is we could bring an update back to the committee in 6 months' time about progress. I don't think we'd necessarily be in a position to evaluate the outcomes at that stage, but we would absolutely build into any procurement process an annual evaluation anyway. That would just be a standard part of the process. So we would absolutely set out at the start what we would expect to see in terms of the number of people supported and the type of support they receive. So we would absolutely build that in, and that could come back to members in an annual update in terms of the service if that was what people wanted to see. But yes, we'd build it into the recommendations in the service specification, and we'd be happy to report that back at a frequency that members are happy to receive.
Can I just quickly respond to that, Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do appreciate building it in, coming back as an annual thing. I think that probably should be a given. My nervousness is, should we be building it into the tender process to limit ourselves from any risk that in a year's time we're left high and dry?
Yeah, it would be built into the tender process. It would be part of the service specification.
Okay. Does that ease any concerns you had? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I've had two further recommendations. We'll need both seconded if possible. So the first one from Councillor Akers-Belcher was to clarify that this is one-off funding for this proposal, and that evaluation of the scheme be fed back to Finance and Policy in 6 months with a further annual report 12 months down the line. Is that seconded? Does that cover everything you were seeking, Councillor Akers-Belcher?
Yes, it does, and it doesn't need to be in the recommendation, but I'm picking up Jill's comment about the asset management, whether or not we can at least minute that.
Okay, thank you. So we've got Councillor Young second that one, and then there was a further one from Councillor Young, which recommended that we explore other gaps and opportunities that there may be further need. And how we might fund those potential programmes moving forward. Does that cover everything you were looking for with that, Councillor Young? Okay, thank you.
Chair, for clarity, clarity on that one, I did mention in order to explore those people who've been delivering in the past for the council the holiday hunger scheme, and that might be a first port of call to make sure those are included within what Mike's proposing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with the additional 2 recommendations, is everybody happy with the recommendations as set out in the report? Is it going to be easier to go around, or if there's any dissent, could you let it be known now, and we'll mark that? No? Okay, we'll take that as approved then, thank you. So item 5.3, which should have came as a separate report for you in the post, is Tall Ships 2023, and I'll bring in Gemma Patak to lead on this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So Tall Ships 2023, the purpose of this report is to seek approval to host the Tall Ships in 2023. Should an application that we've submitted be successful, and also to seek approval to enter into a funding agreement with the Tees Valley Combined Authority. So the detail of this is obviously Hartlepool successfully hosted the Tall Ships in 2010, and there was an opportunity for us to apply to host this again in August 2023. In progressing this, we hope that certainly now more than ever, this is a real opportunity for us to be able to reanimate our culture and heritage in the town and work towards a kind of programme between now and 2023, and also post 2023, to create a significant legacy for us to be able to sustain a sector that certainly coming out of COVID is going to be quite challenging. So we would like to progress with this. There are a number of risks identified in section 5, obviously about the standard of delivery. There's always going to be a reputational risk, but certainly we would do all that we can to mitigate that. And then obviously the ongoing implications of COVID, which we're all aware of. In terms of section 6, financial considerations, we have got written expression from the TVCA for their commitment to support Hartlepool to bring the Tall Ships back, and we're working with them on an application for £3 million should we be successful, and that combined with the income would actually fully fund the budget forecast that we would need to host this event. So in terms of legal considerations, we would need to think about entering into contractual agreement with Tall Ships if successful, and also a funding agreement with TVCA. Further sections consider some of the things that we would look at in terms of child and family poverty, inequality and diversity. I appreciate that the detail on that is limited. However, we are very much in the early stages, and a huge amount more planning would need to be done. However, we're still waiting for an outcome as to whether we're successful or not. If we are, then certainly those considerations would be dealt with in the planning process and thought about in significant amount more detail. So the recommendations in section 13 are that members approve that Hartlepool can host the Tall Ships in 2023 pending approval, and also that you're happy for us to progress with a bid to TVCA for £3 million and enter into that agreement. Happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. I think just before I open up to members, it might be prudent for me to elaborate a little bit on how we got to where we are, because obviously the announcement that Hartlepool had submitted a bid to host the Tall Ships happened months ago, and obviously the report's just coming to Finance and Policy today. This came about from a conversation I'd had with some of the councillors and senior officers about expressing an interest in us potentially hosting again in the future. That was followed with a conversation with the commercial director for Sail Training International in late January, I think, early February, in which we had basically been told that we just missed the opportunity to bid for 2023. However, with a little bit of persuasion and speaking to the board, we did manage to get them to agree to allow us to submit a late bid. We were given effectively 5 working days to do that. So I do apologise that it wasn't shared with members prior to that, because we had an extremely tight deadline to work to. At that point, of course, it was just showing an expression of interest and trying to bid. Hopefully, if we are successful, I'd like to think that this could be a fantastic opportunity for Hartlepool. It will help our local businesses, especially those on Navigation Point in the marina area, especially as well as the wider ISQ and town centre. And it will bring a much needed boost to the town. I think it will lift spirits coming out of this. And I really think it's a fantastic opportunity. The fact that the combined authority are looking to fund the entire event for us removes the level of risk. And I know there are some concerns from some members and from members of the public about how much the last event costs, and having scoured over the budget for the last event, I was kind of in horror at some of the decisions that were made. So we learn from those, like we do with many lessons in life. We learn from those and we make sure we don't repeat them. I have Councillor Akers-Belcher to come in next.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just picking up some of the points that you've already raised. Firstly, I'd like to put on record I have no problem whatsoever in any bid going forward as an expression of interest to apply to host tall ships. Some of us have been on the council long enough to know what happened last time, and I was chair of audit, at the time, and I was presented with evidence, or so-called evidence, that stacked up how much it was going to cost. And I made a prediction before the tall ships that was going to cost us in excess of £2 million on top of what they'd already predicted. And it's not often I'm wrong, but I was right again. And it was over £2 million, and we still have the scars to prove it. And on top of that, there was all the legal wranglings afterwards that we had to enter into. So I want to be very, very clear within the recommendations, because this is about safeguarding the people of Hartlepool. And picking up your point around local businesses thriving out of this, that is what did not happen last time, because any profit out of tall ships went straight down the A1. It didn't stay in Hartlepool, it disappeared. So I think we just need to be very clear on the recommendations, and we need some assurance so we get the public confidence about what we are doing, that we are going to learn from 2010. So I would like the recommendation to state, that the funding agreement that we enter into with the combined authority is the cost envelope that we will work within in order to deliver Tall Ships 2023, and it needs to be that watertight, because what I don't want is for people to come back to us and say we are putting our own finances at risk, because that's what we did last time. And if we go and get the people of Hartlepool behind the bid, they have got that assurance that we are not funding this. It is the combined authority, and it's our agreement that we have and being part of the combined authority that's allowing us to host it at nil cost. So I would like to be very clear within the recommendation that it is not going to cost the council taxpayer in Hartlepool a penny to host it. They are only going to be the beneficiaries of it.
Sorry, so I was just writing that down. So I've got here as a potential recommendation then that the cost envelope that we enter into with the combined authority is the full budget for the event. Does that
I think I need to turn it around, saying that the funding agreement that we enter into with the combined authority, like, you know, that is going to be the total cost envelope in order to deliver the event.
Seconded.
Okay. Denise, did you get that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first of all, obviously I wasn't present in Hartlepool at the 2010 event that has been raised and also been pointed out in the actual paperwork. Yes, I mean, I've heard various different stories about it. Obviously, mostly anecdotal, and yes, with taking into account Christopher Spelcher's point about the loss of potentially up to £2 million. I think that we as an authority have learnt from the mistakes that were made last time, and from various conversations I've had with people, they're more than keen to make sure that this event is a huge success if we are successful in our bid. And you know, I mean, sorry. If we think that the recommendation made by Councillor Akers Spelcher is passed, I think that is probably the safest way going forward. I do understand that, you know, we do have a risk towards a reputational risk if we don't stick to a strong tight budget on this. And I also want to bring into the fact that about local businesses, because I think Christopher made a really good point there, was about making sure that local businesses are given a priority in that they should be quite high in the interest of the event going forward. So I think that perhaps by maybe including them into some of the ideas of when we run the event, if we were to be successful in running the event, the local businesses have some kind of input into that, so that they can see what benefit can be brought. Which, you know, at the end of the day, that's jobs are involved in that, and that can help us move forward as a town. As regards the COVID situation, which I understand is written down in the risk implications, fully understandable that yes, we do have to consider that, but we are talking about 2023, and if we are going to come out of lockdown in the way that we have so far, and it is successful, then I don't really personally envisage any issue in three years down the line. I could be wrong, but we will see on that score. So, I mean, I think it's fantastic that we are at least trying to get this brought to the town. Could be brilliant for our heritage and our culture, and it will certainly put Hartlepool back on the map, and so we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. I have Councillor Marshall to speak next.
Thank you. Yeah, I was on the council in 2010 and I was heavily involved with the Tall Ships event. And I was, like Christopher, totally disappointed at the end of it to think that we'd had to support it with such a large amount of money. So I don't want that to happen again. And I will second Christopher's recommendation that if we say that it's going to cost 3 million, that's what we stick to. There were issues around not a lot of local businesses being involved in the Tall Ships race. I mean, yes, there's the ones that are near at hand, like Navigation Point, etc., but I'm on about other businesses that could have been involved in the printing market, etc., that weren't even utilised. So we need to look at being more local. And I just think, yeah, I want to back Christopher's recommendation just to make sure that we're not going to overspend. Thank you.
Thank you. I think should we be successful, it would be worthwhile us, but we're going to have to anyway put some kind of working group together, cross-party, with officers and other people involved, so we can iron out all of the details and make sure we get it right, and we do learn from the mistakes from last time. Councillor Young to come in next.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I fully support us bringing the Tall Ships back. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and as other councillors have mentioned, we don't need to make the mistakes that we made before. And I think if Tees Valley Combined Authority do back it, which I hope they will, then it'd be fantastic. Let's hope we win the bid. My only concern is linked to the last comments made about businesses, and I think that some of the activity that happened in 2010, I did work for a local hotel at the time that went through an experience of having all of its rooms booked, and then a week before, I think it was, those rooms were cancelled. And I think we need to be very, very clear that if we are going to contract with businesses on whatever level to do whatever service or deliver whatever product, those contracts are honoured to the right level, because there's a lot of disgruntled people locally, particularly in business, at the sheer lack of concern for their livelihoods. And as I think it was Councillor Akers-Belcher who mentioned, that a lot of the money ends up going down the A1. And I think if we are going to be serious about this being an opportunity for business, we need to do everything we can to be transparent and everything we can to encourage as many businesses as possible to come in and to coin a term, get on board with the vision.
Councillor Brown to come in next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to say I appreciate Christopher's experience and his amendment. I think it's very wise to put that in. And I do agree, obviously, with everybody on the benefit to small business. Whilst it is a great benefit to the town, it is good that we include small business as much as we can. I think the last toll ships, in some ways, it's a bit immeasurable the amount of benefit small businesses get, because people who come to the town for the first time to see the toll ships or the first time in a long time, then have a better look at Hartlepool and come back time and time again over the next 12 months or the next 5 years. So I think businesses do benefit, but it's not a measurable benefit. And I think it's just nice to put that positive in, because there's it is a great positive. There's a lot of hard work for officers to do, and I wish them every success. And yeah, I really hope we get it back again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Brewer.
Yes. So just in relation to what we're talking about in terms of local businesses, would there be an opportunity, if we were successful, to reach out to our local education systems, like the colleges and whatnot? We were talking about the absurd cost from the last Toll Ships event, which is fair enough, but I don't think we're highlighting just how beneficial they were to our education systems as well. I mean, myself personally was involved in the Let's Circus and the Urban Chaos groups who helped provide entertainment towards the Toll Ships event. And, well, thanks to groups like that, I think we came out with a rather good grade at the end of it. I just think this would be a great opportunity to help show off that education and even promote it. Would there be any opportunity of anything like that going on again?
I would certainly hope so, yeah, because there will need to be an events package put around the events, and that will come through our cultural teams as well. So, but you made a great point there, James. It isn't just about the added benefits to business. It's the wider community that will feel those benefits as well. Councillor Lindridge. Oh, sorry, Gemma.
Sorry, it was just to come in just on a couple of points that have been made, Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely to reiterate, and certainly James has highlighted it further there, that this would have to be across sector. And I think the benefit that we have as a department is looking at those wider community implications. I think the thing to highlight is actually the economic recovery and the health and social recovery coming out of COVID is more critical than it has ever been. And I think what we would use is a real focus of Toll Ships and working towards that across all sectors to be able to say, how is this going to have a benefit for the town as a whole? I think what we don't want to do is seeing this as exclusive for a cohort of the community, whether that's the business community or also the residential community. So I think we've already started to do some work, and we're looking at how we could have a cultural heritage leisure strategy working towards 2023 and then post 2023. So lots of those conversations and considerations are already happening. And I think just to also, in terms of the financial aspect, just to identify again that we've already started to collate a huge amount of the learning experiences from 2010, and also working with other local authorities that have hosted the tall ships and actually gaining further insight and learning. So it's just to reiterate that certainly there's a huge amount of work, and as I say, the COVID situation has certainly lent itself to be able to consider this more holistically than ever before. So it was just to give that reassurance to members.
Thank you, Gemma. We'll take final comment from Councillor Lindridge, please.
Thanks, Chair. I actually think that this is another opportunity again to put Hartlepool on the map. In the 2010, I think it's been the best thing that ever happened to the town, right? It actually showed us in a positive light, because a lot of the times we've got maligned in the press. Apart from the financial aspects, you know, everything was positive on there. We will learn from our experiences in terms of engaging with local businesses. There should have been done a little bit more and given them the next time, if we're successful, the priorities for the event space and renting the plots and getting involved with the activities that we present. What I think we need to do is to link up with our partners, and Gemma's just alluded to there. I actually went up about 2 years ago when Sunderland hosted their Tall Ships event, and they asked me my advice. It was on a cultural and heritage links that we had, and they learned from the experience that I was able to pass on. And I did talk to Christopher and Kevin Cranny at the time, and it was really important that they found out the mistakes, if you call them mistakes, or the benefits that we had in presenting the tall ships, and they learned from that. What I would like to see is for Gemma to consider that they link back in with Sunderland, because if they've learned from the benefits of talking to us about where we potentially went wrong, we could also benefit from them for the ideas that they gleaned from us and how they made things successful, particularly in the transport situation. We had a lot of issues with the transport and the parking and getting people from A to B, right? That was really important. So, and as well as that, we should be considering it shouldn't, maybe not, be a totally freebie event. If we'd have had a small contribution made from everybody that attended them events, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, that could have mitigated and reduced some of the costs or the losses that that Borough Council, you know, had to cope with. So other than, you know, what everybody said, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. I'm really looking forward to us being successful with the bid, because it'll give everybody a huge boost. And providing there's not a negative impact with a loss of revenue, which is really important, we need to make sure that we're successful and we stay within the budget constraints. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lindridge. Okay, I'll move to the recommendations then. So we have the recommendations set out in the report, plus the additional one from Councillor Rakers-Belcher that was seconded by Councillor Young, I believe it was. Is everybody happy with those recommendations, or is there anybody who does not, who could show now, raise your hand? Otherwise, I'll take it as full agreement. Let's wait just in case. No? Great, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. It does say that these ones are requiring decisions, but actually I think the agenda was slightly wrong. These items are just for information and to note. But 6.1, COVID-19 financial position update, and I believe Chris Little will bring this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've set out in the report in the background some of the information that was reported to Council on the 10th of June in relation to the impact that COVID's had on people's lives and the role the Council's played over a sustained period. At the start, particularly the need to make very quick decisions in response to COVID, and that position was being repeated across the land in all councils. The decisions that have been made were made in accordance with the Constitution, Part 3, which is summarised at 3.2, and effectively delegated decisions by the Chief Executive. And I'll say a little bit more on that as we go through the report. We've divided the report into 4 sections, covering the different types of decisions. So ones that we've focused as service delivery decisions, hardship decisions, business grants decisions, and a couple of other decisions that were made. Section 4 deals with the service delivery decisions. It's probably easiest to refer members to the table at the top of page 3 to really give you a summary of the decisions that were being made. The government have recognised that there'll be extra costs on authorities. We've received 2 tranches of funding from the government, a total of just under £6 million. The first tranche was 3.4 million, and the second one just under 2.6. The government used different formula for allocating the 2 tranches of funding. The government so far are very firm in terms of saying that they're providing funding for expenditure being incurred by councils. And you can see from the table that that's clearly the case in one respect, that our expenditure so far is just under 2.2 million, and we've got 5.9 of grant. Where there's a debate between local government and central government is that COVID's having a massive impact on income. And they're not decisions that we're actually making, they are just events that are happening to us. So like the business sector's lost customers, we've lost income in the same vein. Leisure centres have been closed, other services haven't been provided to the public, so we've lost income from those areas. Probably more significantly, and you can see in the table, is the impact on the cost of local council tax support. This is the first time this regime has been tested in terms of a big economic impact since it was introduced in 13-14. We think, and we've already seen evidence of a significant increase in claimant numbers. We're about 8% up on where we were before COVID. I regrettably think there'll be a second spike when the furloughing scheme ends and companies make decisions around future employment levels and redundancy decisions. So we've built in a forecast of what we think the impact will be on an increase in the cost of local council tax support of £2 million this year, and we expect that'll take a while to unwind as the economy recovers, and £1 million in for the following year. So what we've shown in that table is based on the funding provided so far by the government. We're about a forecast of 2.9 million short, and that is only the position at the end of July as requested by the government in their last return. We're hopeful of another funding announcement from the government in the next week or two, and we'll keep members updated as and when things change. 4.6 really deals with the detailed expenditure decisions that have been made in response to COVID. The process we followed was the proposals went to the corporate management team for an initial challenge. And once that had happened, they were then formally approved by the Chief Executive, but obviously in consultation with the relevant policy chair, which for the vast majority of them was actually the chair of this committee, because most of them were financially related. And they were also signed off by the Chief Solicitor and myself. Those decision records are set out in Appendix A to the report. Turning now to hardship decisions in Section 5. The government announced 500 million nationally that was available for councils, predominantly support working age local council tax recipients. Effectively, the government wanted councils to give a reduction or a further reduction in local council tax bills as quickly as possible of £150. There was a bit of a delay between the government making their announcements and the national computer companies being able to change the software, because it was an easy thing to say, but quite a tricky thing for the computer systems to implement. So that took a little bit of time, but we processed them as soon as we could. In terms of the local decision, when we looked at the detail, if you increase the amount from the minimum £150 to £167.22, that actually removed the remaining liability for 5,500 households in Hartlepool. And obviously that was helpful for households because they didn't have a residual council tax of £17.22 to pay. And equally, it avoided a large admin burden of collecting a very small amount of money from a large number of houses. When you take into account that decision and an anticipated increase in the council tax caseload over the course of this year, we think we'll have committed 1.480 million of the available funding, and there's an uncommitted balance currently of 384,000. Obviously, that's based on what we think might happen to LCTS caseloads, and what we suggest in the report is we'll keep monitoring this position, and we'll come back to members later in the year in terms of what we think might be left of this funding, this one-off funding from the government, and then bring forward proposals for members to consider in terms of how best to deploy that money. Just mentioned a little bit in paragraph 511 about council tax collection for non-LCTS households. Collection rates are slightly down at the end of May 2020 compared to the year before by 1.3%, and across the North East the range is between 0.5% and 1.8%, more towards the slightly higher end of the 1.8 than the lower end, and that's something we will keep monitoring very closely for the rest of the year. Section 6 deals with business grants decision records. Again, as we set out in the report to council, there was a very quick decisions from the government around the headline announcements, then delays in terms of issuing the detailed guidance. For the initial schemes, I think we had 3 versions of the guidance. So that demonstrates how tricky it was in terms of managing that. We acted as quickly as we could, as we reported to council. In the very early days, the 20th of April, I thought was a good position to review progress. We ranked 13th out of 314 councils at that date. We paid out 80% of eligible grants, and at the time the national average was 50%. As at the 5th of June, we paid out 94%. Of eligible businesses, just under 1,500, and just under 16.8 million had been paid out. There were problems with the national scheme. The eligibility criteria excluded a number of business areas. In response to that, the government made an announcement that we could use 5% of the original allocation, which is 876,000, for a discretionary local scheme. And we've been working through that. And as we've set out in the report, we've got over 170 applications. We're still working through those. A lot of information that was required was missing, and until we've got all of that information in, it's difficult to approve any of the grants. So we're working through that. Section 7 finally deals with other decision records, and they included, for completeness, there was some provision in relation to payments for home to school transport. The government issued a set of principles that were known as procurement policy notes, and it was around the sector trying to protect services for when lockdown's over and services come back to normal. I think the rationale behind this was, if services are already paid for by the public purse, we should keep paying the providers for those services. That would avoid them furloughing staff, etc. It would also keep the capacity ready to start. So one area that we've paid out on is home to school transport. I think since the decision record was approved, as we worked through the payments, they were adjusted to minimise any impact where there was a double payment for businesses that might have received the £10,000 grant. And also, as we worked through some of them, some of the providers had furloughed staff, so we needed to work through that carefully as well, because we weren't the whole customer of some of the companies. So we worked through those carefully. And the second one related to increased mortuary capacity. The recommendations, Chair, as you've said, are to note the report, and one of them includes noting that we'll come back on the hardship fund. And at that point, Chair, that was all I was going to say on the report.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I've got a couple of people with their hands raised. I've got Councillor Mike Young to come in first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think nobody can deny the amount of work that has to be done in such a short space of time, particularly at the beginning of lockdown. And I think officers need to be commended for the efforts that they put in and the speed at which they moved. That being said, I've obviously gone through the paperwork and I've got a few questions about a couple of areas, but I'll just deal with them one at a time if I can. The order 2008 was about supporting food parcels And my question about those are, how long was the process to find the right people to deliver that service? How many businesses or voluntary sector organisations were invited to that process? What did the procurement look like and include? And at the end of it, why was it decided that it needed to just be one commercial organisation that did that work?
Chris, do you want to answer that, or is Jill Harrison coming in to get that one?
I was hoping Jill Harrison was going to come in to answer that one.
Okay, thanks, Chris. The process to identify somebody was very quick. We did have some emergency food parcels prior to this, provided by the food bank, but they were only able to sustain people for 2 to 3 days, and were obviously limited in terms of content. So these weekly food parcels were able to sustain either an individual, a couple or a family for a week, and did include fresh food as well as dried and canned goods. So more nutritional value and more range of choice for people. The model of approaching a local business, that was something that other local authorities in the region had used. So we took a similar approach. There was some work undertaken by the economic development team to identify potential providers, and a recommendation made about the provider that was successful in terms of them having the necessary insurance, hygiene rating, being able to provide the service and being centrally located. So there were a number of benefits to that provider. And the support was initially commissioned for 4 weeks and then was extended. The agreement has now come to an end because the demand for those weekly food parcels has reduced so significantly, largely linked to the sort of easing of lockdown measures and people being able to access food differently. So it was very much something that we needed urgently at the time. People were really struggling to access food at the time through supermarkets. It was at the time of the very long queues and some products not being available. So it was really beneficial for us to have access to the food parcels through a local business that we were able to support, that did then use other local businesses in order to fulfil the boxes. And they did have access to, obviously, supply chains that others didn't at that point in time. So it very much filled an urgent need.
Okay, I would personally like, if it's possible, Chair, to have a list of the businesses that were approached and the reasons why they weren't selected for the next Finance and Policy meeting, please.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring those forward. I got Councillor. Did you have anything else? Was that? Okay, I got Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come in on the point that Councillor Young's already raised, but I just want to make a general point based on the report that's come forward today. I understand that decisions need to be made quickly, and I already expressed at full council with regards to the local council tax support. And I understand decisions had to be made quickly and they were made in line with the Constitution. But at the same time, we may have made decisions constitutionally, but morally, there was nothing to stop this council consulting with members. Like, you know, that could have been done by telephone, it could have been done by email. All those systems were still in place. And to morally lock out members of Finance and Policy in key decisions that we consider key in the delivery of responding to the pandemic, to me, is just caused a complete democratic deficit across the council for 3 months. And I just find it unacceptable. And I would like put in the minutes that I've expressed that view, that it was unacceptable, because if we have another wave and further lockdown, I would expect to be consulted. And as Chair of Regeneration, that point that Councillor Young's made, where economic development has been consulted, economic development falls under regeneration. And as Chair of Regeneration, no one spoke to me. And on the business grants, section 6 of the report, it talks about, like, how that no one had a conversation with me about business grants. And the second wave, which is a discretionary one, there was a deadline put on that, and I know that there's people out there in the community who've contacted me as chair of Regeneration, and I hadn't been consulted. So to actually say publicly that relevant policy chairs were consulted, well, I wasn't, because, like, everyone knows I've sent numerous emails and really tried to articulate my displeasure at there being a democratic deficit in this council over the period of the pandemic. I can't say anymore, but I would like to put in the minutes, and I would like to cover 1 point over the item 8 and 13, the decision records to do with the private organisation that was doing our food parcels, and there's a few points that I want to make on it. One is this: the first one is this council has always prided itself on working with the voluntary community sector and keeping things locally. And where has that moral compass fallen, so that we now move away what the council's already prided itself on to now working with a private organisation? But to me, it's much worse than that, because our holiday hunger scheme, our parcels for our young families, I know there were children only, were capped at £30. These family parcels delivered by a private organisation, some of them were £60 odd, and we've given away £61,000 to a private organisation. And how does that fit when the same decision records before us today, we managed to give the food bank £15,000 in an emergency? Like, how does the public go into view that we give a private organisation 61,000? And I know feedback from the public, some of the contents weren't acceptable. Through the community hubs, a lot has gone to waste. And I agree with the report that Councillor Young's asked to come back, because I would like to see who's been contacted, but I would like more in the report. I would like an evaluation of how that was implemented, because I've been involved in delivering the holiday hunger schemes, and we have had to provide receipts, we've had to provide who they went to, and we've had to provide feedback, a full evaluation. And I think on that spend of 61,000, Finance and Policy should get a full evaluation report back. How many families, who was consulted, and all of that. And what I don't understand at all is why, when we have our own schools that were providing school meals and we have a vibrant voluntary community sector, why didn't our schools have the opportunity to be involved and provide it? And I would have rather see £61,000 go to our schools and the voluntary community sector than to a private organisation. So that's what I would like to say on that. And I don't expect a response, because, like, I've sent emails about trying to get involved before, and until we pushed for full council, I don't think we would have been presented with the decision records even now. So, like, I would like that report to include, like, a full evaluation of that spend of the 61,000. And I have one other comment to make. I don't know whether anyone needs to respond on what I've already said around not being involved in the evaluation, but the other one relates to the homeless team, and I believe it is.
Oh, sorry, Christopher. Before we move to that, was there anything you wanted to respond to on those particular points, Jill? Before we move on to a different decision record.
Not just, obviously, if further detail is required, we can pull that together for a future report. Everything that's done through the support hub's been captured in terms of data and monitoring, so we can certainly provide any information that's needed.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Christopher, you want Councillor Belcher, you wanted to go on to another one?
Yeah, it is a decision record 23, and it's to do with the homeless. And, like, I would question the validity of why we've ended up with this decision record, because I know that the council engaged with an organisation called Cornerstone last year, and it was having a look at our homelessness across the town. And whether or not that's informed the decision around where we put the homeless when there was a directive off the government to make sure our homeless were off the street. But the feedback that I am getting from staff within the local authority and feedback from the public is with regards to the homeless in general, because some of our homeless that were rehoused did not go to Melbourne House. They were still housed within bed and breakfast. And the feedback that we received also was that the Melbourne wasn't accepting, adults. They were only accepting younger people. So in the same way that Councillor Young's asked for a report around the evaluation of those food parcels, I would like a full evaluation of what we've done around homeless, what interventions we did, how we did them, who was housed, whether we housed them anywhere else. Because to block book and give an organisation where the cornerstone consultation would say that we didn't have the need, that is questionable, but why you would do a full block booking. And I would like to see whether there is a correlation between whether or not we identified the homeless team, and I know they've done a fantastic job in Hartlepool about identifying them, but then they were still housed elsewhere, and the decision record says B&Bs wouldn't take them. And I know personally where some people have been housed as adults because they wouldn't be accepted at Melbourne House. So in the same way, I would like a report to come back to Finance and Policy about that decision record. I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Sally, did you want to respond to that item?
Yes, so Councillor Belcher has asked for a report back. He's right that we did have the work from Cornerstone, but I'm more than happy to bring a report through as requested.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Smith.
Hiya, it was just in relation to what Councillor Akers-Belcher said, that if we sat and had a full-blown conversation in changing the way that the Holiday Hunger Fund is going to run because of the quality of food that's given out. Yet that full conversation was just kiboshed, and we went with a private company to deliver food parcels that we don't know of the quality. The contents vary depending on what they could get hold of at what cheap price. The amount, I mean, they've made a profit out of the boxes that they've supplied, but have they also claimed a £10,000 business grant? So during that pandemic, they got an income of what, £71,000. So that's a good profiteering out of a pandemic. We can video conference. We should have been able to say, this is what we're going to do. How are we going to go? Are we going to use? The schools were open. They were feeding the children in the class. Why the conversation that we had that we were going to use schools for Holiday Hunger Fund, why wasn't that explored, and why didn't we go and keep that in-house so we knew exactly? We've got suppliers, we can access suppliers. I can even access suppliers to be able to get stuff. It's just, I think it's not money wasted because the people who received them were grateful for what they received, but we could have done a better job and it could have cost a lot less.
Can I just respond? I mean, something my mother always used to say to me, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And I completely appreciate the frustration and questions and concerns that members have. But I think thinking back to the time when a lot of these decisions were being made, everything was up in the air. Suppliers were struggling in certain places. We were having to make decisions very fast. And yeah, like we discussed with the previous agenda item, we have learned lessons, and we have reached and we have gone down a different model now when decisions are being made. But similarly, decisions aren't needing to be made at such a speed as they were in the beginning. So I appreciate things weren't done ideally. They weren't done. We could have done that better. But at the time, I know how stressed I was trying to deal with it all, and I think it was a difficult, fast-moving environment. So yeah, could we have done better? Probably, but we learned from that. I
totally get that. I mean, to initiate it originally, yeah, you need to do it fast, you need to do it quick, but then you extended it, then you changed it, then you increased the boxes. You went with that model and stuck with it instead of thinking this is I mean, to get a business grant as well, that's just like, you know, taking the eyes and the sockets. It's yes, go originally with what we went for, but you would have had time after the first 4 weeks to reassess and go, this is an expensive way to go about it. The schools are open, the schools don't have a problem in supplies, the schools are still feeding the children. Let's move it into there. We've got rid of the initial rush. We now move it to where it's in-house, where we can control quality, the delivery dates, the you name it. You know, instead you just thought, sorry, you didn't just think, but instead we just continued on the path that we'd started instead of assessing.
Fair comment. I've got Councillor Young.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think they probably were successful in getting a £25,000 grant actually, because they were in the specific retail, restaurant, hospitality sector, so they probably would have got a £25,000 grant. I'm not going to labour on that anymore because I think the points have been made. On order number 23, do we have a number of homeless people in the town? Is there a specific number that we can have read to us, please?
Sorry, Councillor. Specifically, you want the number of people who have been identified as being homeless during this period, or more broadly?
Both, I think, is a good idea.
Okay. And you'd like that including in the report in terms of a broader sort of a homeless picture from the information we've had from sort of back end of last year, and then how it may have changed during COVID-19 and then our response.
Yeah,
yes,
but linked also specifically to order number 2023, because I think it's important that we know whether we were just housing homeless people and the number of those homeless people in the town or from the town, or whether we were actually taking people from outside the town as well, and then we were paying for those people to come into the town, because I think there's a question mark, and I appreciate it was under government directive, and I appreciate everything that's been said, but I think we need to be clear on who we were actually housing and the number of people and where they were from.
Okay. I think that would have been checked by the team, as we've had individuals present as homeless, but I will make sure that's included, Councillor Young.
Many thanks.
We've got Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question, more of a reflection on what the situation has been. I mean, there's no doubt for all of us it's been an incredibly unique situation, and I do appreciate the need for the speedy decisions on matters that of great urgency, and I just want to commend the officers for their efforts in this unique situation, and having been able to deliver really good outcomes for particularly LCTS, Council Tax Support Scheme, and for businesses. You know, I mean, if we look very, very closely, we've supported over 90% of businesses in the town, which is something to be commended. And I understand some of the councillors' points with regard to decision making and various other things, but we have to really remember just how important it was to be quick and effective Otherwise, if we were not, then I think we might find ourselves in an even worse position. So I do take a lot of the points that people have made, but I think we have, by and large, been successful in dealing with the crisis and giving as much support to people at the bottom of the scale, and of course those businesses, to try and keep those businesses going and the jobs going.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. I've got Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point. It's just going back to the business grants decision records and whether or not there's any scope to reopen the discretion based on some businesses out there who do sublet premises, like, weren't aware that they could apply.
Chris?
I think the discretionary scheme has allowed those businesses to apply. I think there are some that have applied already. In terms of the scheme, as I've said already, we're assessing the applications that we've received. Depending on how many are eligible, there may be some of the funding left. I think if there is some funding left, we'll have to have a look at a third scheme. From talking to colleagues across the Tees Valley, I think they think there'll be funding left. I think everyone's had a number of applications that they think won't be eligible. I think it was interesting for Hartlepool being the smallest of the Teesside unitary authorities. I think we had the most applications for the discretionary scheme in total. And if you prorated that up to the size of the town, it would be way ahead. I don't quite understand why that's the case, but we'll work through them and see what the outcome is against the existing funding. And if there's funding left, we'll have to come back with further proposals.
Councillor Akers-Belcher, did you want to come back?
No, it's fine, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Smith.
With the businesses that have received the business grant, is there any way that we can assess the money that's been paid out to them, and if their income is greater than it would have been from the previous year, to be able to reclaim that business grant? Because clearly they weren't in any need for the money, and the money can be redistributed to other organisations who actually lost money. I do know of organisations that didn't furlough staff because they didn't want to be bothered with the complications, the details that they had to fill in. So they put their staff on 0-hour contracts. So they're going to get the grant because they didn't furlough anybody. There is also people, as we can just clearly see, that made a decent amount. They got a decent income from the being open during the pandemic. So year on year, that from previous year's income, they would have increased. So again, wouldn't have actually needed the grant, but would have been paid for it. Is there any way that we can actually look at that?
The simple answer is no. And the reason for that, Councillor Smith, is the original scheme was a government scheme. They set the parameters of exactly who was eligible and what grants they had to receive. The tests we had to do were fairly limited. I think the point you make is valid. I think there is quite a good chance that some businesses actually that have received the grants, and I'll emphasise these are government-funded grants with a government scheme, probably have not had any detriment during COVID. I'm sure there are other businesses that weren't eligible for the grant have actually had the reverse position. There is a series of effectively validation checks that we're now running through with government around eligibility, more from sort of a fraud prevention perspective, not an eligibility perspective, and it'll be interesting to see what that brings out. In relation to the local scheme, the discretionary scheme, a lot was discretionary. There was very strong steer from the government as to who should be eligible in terms of the businesses that had been missed out the first time from the national criteria. And across the Tees Valley, certainly, we all adopted schemes that were modelled around those criteria. two reasons for that. One was, as a council, if we hadn't followed that very strong steer, I'm sure there'd have been people complain that we hadn't. And equally then in the Tees Valley, we thought it was sensible to have a consistent approach if we could, so that we didn't have businesses in Hartlepool playing us off against businesses in Middlesbrough, Stockton, if we all had slightly different schemes. So we've tried to work consistently and have a fair system across the wider patch rather than just Hartlepool.
Thank you, Chris. I've got Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, I think throughout this very strained period, I think Hartlepool Borough Council and in particular officers have done a really large amount of hard and good work. I notice you come under criticism a little bit for getting some of the food distribution wrong. And it is very difficult, I guess, when you're doing so many things. And I also just respect your answer of honesty that, okay, you got that a bit wrong and maybe you got it continued wrong. But I think as long as we learn from that, for if we do have another spike, then you know, okay, great answer.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Right, that's everybody then. If people's happy, we'll, the only decision, Councillor Lindridge to come in.
Just correct me if I'm wrong with this, whether this has been discussed on 2007 in relation to Harbour, the value of 18,753. What's the situation in regards lockdown? Potentially a greater incidence of domestic violence. There's bound to be, you know, that's my opinion. So does this affect the figures and the value that we're given support to sort of mitigate the problems? Because this could increase as time goes on. Can anybody answer that?
I think I could probably come in on that, Chair, if it's helpful.
Yes, please.
So in relation to domestic abuse, we've had weekly reports out from Harbour, and I think it's fair to say that the organisation's coped remarkably well with the challenges. They haven't had difficulties with staffing. They haven't lost a number of staff in terms of people becoming unwell. We have seen increases in incidents of domestic abuse, and this has supported the organisation to respond to that. So we continue to work really closely with the organisation about what their needs are. Excuse me, sorry. And I think they're sort of working with us, being very fair about what some of the challenges are, but also, you know, where the organisation is. So they're only asking for additional support when that has been identified as a need to enable them to actually provide the level of support that they want to do to victims and young people.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, right. Are members happy to note the reports then? Obviously, we've requested two further reports to come back with additional information on two of them. But other than that, we're happy to note the reports. Yeah.
Noted.
Great, thank you. I've had a number of requests from members if we can take a couple of minutes comfort break, and before we finish off the next two items. So if I can get somebody to second that, please, we'll just take 5 minutes comfort break, and then we'll all just come
Seconded.
back. Great, thank you. John, are you back?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, I'll just get Ed to start the stream again. Okay, great. Thank you very much, councillors and officers. And apologies to members of the public or anybody else watching for that. We'll move on to agenda item 6.2. That's the Town Fund, Town Centre Master Plan and High Street Task Force. And that will be done by Denise McGuckin.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Everybody, great. So this is to inform the members of Finance and Policy of the invitation for Hartlepool to develop proposals for a 25 million town deal, the creation of a master plan for our town centre, and also our involvement in the High Street Task Force as a pilot authority. The report provides details of capacity funding that was allocated to Hartlepool to develop the town investment plan, and also governance arrangements and membership of a new town deal board. And also the report seeks approval for council to take on the role of lead counsel for the town fund, and we will be the accountable body for the capacity funding and future town deal. So the town deal has been, Hartlepool is identified as one of 100 places invited to develop proposals for a town deal. The aim of the fund is to address growth constraints and unlock the economic potential of areas such as Hartlepool. Government will consider investing up to 25 million in each town deal, depending on the robustness and the evidence supporting our business cases put forward. The objective of the fund is to drive the economic regeneration of the town, as set out in the report in section 3.3. So the report goes into the town investment plan in section 4. It must complement pre-existing strategies, and members will recall that we produced an economic growth strategy last year, which runs until 2021, and also needs to align with the government's clean growth objectives and the UK's commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. The town deal is about driving long-term transformational change to local economies, and it is therefore anticipated that this will focus on the capital investment. What government's recent guidance has come out following COVID is 90% of the fund will be for capital expenditure. The town deal board, the details of which are set out in section appendix 1 of the report, is a vehicle for which the vision and strategy for the town will be defined. The role of the board is to develop and agree an evidence-based town investment plan, develop a clear programme of interventions, and coordinate resources and influence stakeholders. Appendix 1 sets out the terms of reference and the membership as detailed by the government's guidance. And members have already this morning declared interest in some, so you should be aware of which members are on the committee. The Town Centre Master Plan is included in section 6 of the report. Hartlepool, like many town centres, is facing unprecedented challenges. We were facing those challenges as a northeast coastal town prior to COVID, and this has only been exacerbated since the pandemic has arrived. We're not unique in this regard, and we must respond to these new challenges by finding new ways to attract footfall and visitors to Hartlepool's town centre area. This will be a challenging time. We will have to think out of the box. We will need strong local leadership, and we will need the intervention of the local authority to use all of its powers and back local stakeholders and the wider community. As we won't be able to do this on our own, we will need partners to work with us. Individual town centres need to identify the mix that best suits their specific requirements and characteristics and our local strengths. We will have to adapt. We will need to look at green space, leisure, arts and culture, heritage, health and social care services, and combine housing to create areas based on social interaction. Our high streets as a retail base will not be there going forward, as is being replicated across the country. In order to respond to the challenges, a town centre master plan has been commissioned to review and reshape the town centre. The boundary of the master plan includes the town centre, the civic quarter and the innovation skills Quarter, which is shown in the second appendix of Appendix 1. The master plan will also consider a number of issues in addition to the future of the town centre. For example, the end use of the Mill House site once the Mill House Leisure Centre has been relocated, aspirations of the football club, and the next stage of the delivery of the Innovation and Skills Quarter, along with other proposals that will come forward as we go through the consultation. Hartlepool has also been invited to take part in a pilot of High Street Task Force programmes. This is set out in section 7.1. We had a visit from the task force officers just prior to COVID pandemic hitting the country, and we are working through that, and the details of which are set out in section 7 of the report, Chair. The pilot has been paused now due to COVID. However, the government have said that they will be picking that back up and working with Hartlepool going forward. Financial considerations included in section 9. We received a grant of £173,000. It is a section 31 type grant to support the development of a town deal and investment plan. We went through a competitive tendering process, and Arcadis and Genicom, who have substantial experience of developing investment plans and town centre master plans, have been commissioned at a cost of £145,000, and they are currently consulting with businesses, stakeholders, and we're working on a way of how we can actually consult with the public during this difficult time. Agreeing the town deal investment plan and having a robust evidence-based report will enable us to strengthen our case. It is not guaranteed that we will get 25 million. Government have said they will be reviewing that and making sure that we do hit all of the criteria, and we have a robust system in place to actually make sure we will deliver on that. As I mentioned before, consultation will be challenging, but it is something we know is really important, because if we just produce a plan, it'll end up not being owned, and it's very unlikely it will be delivered, and it's something that we need to make sure happens. Town deal is part of the government's levelling up agenda, and the government are still pushing that, and we hope that obviously Hartlepool will therefore stand in good light for that. The master plan will also examine ways of bringing empty and derelict buildings back into use, which is something I know the members are really have been pushing for a long time now, and unfortunately we have a number of derelict buildings in the town centre area, so we need to address that. The recommendations are set out in section 17.1 of the report, Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yep, sorry. Although I mentioned, declared an interest at the start of this on this agenda item, it's not a prejudicial one. It's just a one that I am a member of it by virtue of the position within the council. I do believe that this scheme and everything around it in the various schemes, have the potential to really unlock a lot of the potential. To repeat myself, for the town centre and wider area. I think we do need to think outside of the box, because it was quite clear pre-COVID that our high street, or the traditional high street, was struggling to keep up with changing habits, and I think that's certainly been shown to have accelerated during the COVID period as well. Maybe we do need to think really radical about what we do for our town centre and wider area, but I'm looking forward to see how this board progresses and the information and the evidence that comes forward as part of that base, and I look forward to sharing that more broadly with you all as and when it comes. I have Councillor Mike Young to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's massively exciting that this opportunity has presented itself. I think realistically, though, 25 million in the scheme of everything that we want to deliver as a council is probably on the low side, but it's a fantastic kickstart if we're successful in achieving that, to try and get some of these ideas from the paper, as Denise said, into the fore and start to bring them forward for the benefit of the town. One of the things that has been mentioned quite a number of times in the town deal board meetings is that thing of connectivity, and I think that's been highlighted a number of times, and I think that speaks to the very need for us to address the geography of the situation. And I think if we only end up with a situation where 25 million is where we're at and no further investment or inward investment comes forward, then we've got to really be careful, I think, in where we pin that. And I think connectivity of those key areas of the town, the ISQ, the kind of marina and waterfront area, and the civic quarter, they're kind of key areas of the town that at the minute aren't that brilliantly connected, if we're totally honest. And I think that will probably be a starting point, certainly from what I've read in the appendix, going forward and as a starting point.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Akers-Belcher to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have a particular question. I just really want to echo what Councillor Young said, because I think it's a huge opportunity, but I do have an anxiety around people might think £25 million is a huge amount of money, but I think we need to be realistic in what can be achieved. And I think that's why the town deal board is really important, to get the best we possibly can for Hartlepool by working in partnership with others. And I do welcome what Denise said about addressing the empty properties and the derelict buildings, because we have followed some of these for quite some time. And I think the report perhaps could have, had an emphasis, because there's things like the Wesley Chapel, there's things like the courts, and we focused on things that are ours, but really from a public perception point of view, everybody views them exactly the same, whether it's a council asset or not. It's what we need to do to repurpose the function of our town and that critical mass and reimagine what we can achieve. And I think we need to have a look at things like, do we need to pedestrianise part of the town? Do we need to have a look at our own assets in the wider footprint, and can we get some cost savings by looking at, well, what could be the purpose of the court building, what could be the purpose of the empty properties? But I do welcome the opportunity, but I think people need to have their feet firmly on the ground and realise that £25 million isn't going to go very far.
Thank you. Councillor Little.
Thank you, Chair. With what Councillor Akers-Belcher has just said, if we pedestrianise the whole of the town, a lot of our people who shop in the towns now are our elderly, and they would find it quite difficult to get from one end to another. So I don't think that would be a main objective to I would strongly object to that if we were going to pedestrianise, because they are the people who spend the money in our town. You only have to look at the buses.
Sorry, I don't think Councillor Belcher specifically said pedestrianising all of the town centre. He said that there may be areas we need to look at pedestrianising.
Yeah, right. Well, I still think you would need to think about the people who do shop in our town centre. What concerns me about this is that Into is just called the Receivers in financial at the Metro Centre. How are we going to try and get these shops to our town when the likes of the Metro Centre are struggling now? And we all think good shopping days go to the Metro, but
you might. I like precision shopping. I know what I want. I go in, I get it, and get out. But yeah,
you don't get bargains that way.
But you raise a valid point. But then it comes back to that whole discussion we've been having, isn't it? And we need to reimagine our town centre areas and change it from a purely retail experience to one of retail, leisure, housing. There needs to be a good mix. It needs to be not just, and it kind of is what the Metro Centre is. I suspect it's not just a shopping centre. It's an experience. You go there for the day. You go to eat. You do a bit of shopping and everything else. And I think that's what we need to look at with our town centres moving forward.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lindridge.
Thanks, Chair. I think another positive fund potential here to link in with the tall ships, a little Panzer division here, bringing money into the town. I think the key is, and Mike's alluded to, connectivity. It really is important. 25 million, it sounds a huge amount, but it doesn't go very far away. It doesn't go a long way once you get a contractor in to do the work and soon be gobbled up. I think the key is we need the public to be on board with this as well. We don't want to be claiming 25 million and then it's just a superficial makeover. There's got to be something positive. And when I've looked at the Hartlepool Town board members, there's a good range on there. And what I want to see is that being fed back to councillors to discuss finance and policy regeneration. And if the COVID continues here, I hope it doesn't, then we need to have more communication. Crystal Akers-Belcher has mentioned this earlier on, and I agree with them. We can't have any decisions made in a closed shop situation. So we need to be open and transparent so that we're all on board with this. So that when we're talking to residents and hopefully we can be out and about again, we give them the real positive view of any funding that we get, whether it be for the tall ships or for the town deal plan. So really go for this, share the information, and let's get going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindridge. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. First things first, I do share some of the points Councillor Chris Akers-Belcher was making and a few other councillors, in the sense that, yes, £25 million sounds like a lot of money, but we do need to keep our feet firmly on the ground with regards to how much that actually could deliver. But having said that, I think that the opportunity going forward is really quite exciting, that we can look at a way of reimagining the town centre in changing world. People aren't shopping physically as much as they were in the past. So that is a fundamental point that does need to be taken into account. But we do need to be bold, we do need to be radical, and we do need to really think about what the town centre could be in the future. And yes, I think including public thoughts in that would be useful to bring the public on board with the town board. So I would like that to be perhaps maybe included in the recommendations, so that the town board does actually take into account the public ideas that they might have. I mean, of course, they may not all be realistic, but let's include as many people as possible without going a bit too crazy on. I'm sure lots of people have lots of different ideas what they would like to see for the town centre, but we do need to be realistic about what is actually deliverable. I would also perhaps like to suggest the possibility that the town board and of course any other stakeholders to actually go to other councils who have revitalised their town centres and ask them how do they do it, what ideas did they take on board in the beginning, what ideas were rejected, and what ideas were actually successful in implementation. Of course, I'm not talking about big major cities that are totally, we do need to be proportionate in regard to which councils, in regard to their comparability, as if you like, with Hartlepool. I mean, just one thought that came to my head was when the Gateshead Council actually changed their town centre, not far from the civic centre actually, down by the interchange. But I know that the Gateshead interchange was actually rebuilt many years before the introduction of the student halls of residence and the big Tesco's and the cinema and the high street was given a really good improvement. And of course they finally got rid of the famous car park, the Get Carter car park, which was a bit of a bone of contention for a lot of people in Gateshead. But putting all that to one side, I think it's worthwhile speaking to these councils who have town centres that need revitalising and have done so, and looking at what the success areas are and taking all of that into account. So I would like that to be perhaps included into the recommendations.
Denise, did you want to respond on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say it's really encouraging to have lots of support from all the members regarding this. And yes, 25 million isn't a lot of money, but and we need to spend it wisely, because we'll only get one shot at this. We'll only get one chance to get our bid in, and we need to get it right. So it's really encouraging. The work in Section 7, which I skimmed over very briefly about the High Street Task Force and being a pilot, is exactly what Councillor Tennant's referring to, and of actually how we will be engaged with the other local authorities that have done this successfully across the country. So hopefully, Councillor Tennant, that picks up the point you're raising there. So we will learn, and we are we're the only North East local authority that's been invited to be part of this, so that's encouraging for Hartlepool. So I would just obviously draw members' attention to Section 11 of the report about consultation, and where we will be having workshops with people. It's very difficult at the moment to consult, as we know, what with social distancing, but we are doing everything we can to make sure we capture the views of everyone. And I suppose what at one point I would like to get across is this is about a town centre and a town for the future. And I include myself in that. But I would be, talking to my young people in my family, asking them what they want. And it's really important we gain the views of young people, because it's the town for them that we are actually master planning. And that's why skills and enterprise infrastructure is really important, that we are engaging with the colleges and the students there. So it's just to thank members for their support for this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I bring Councillor Brown in to finish there, just to continue on from what Denise was saying, as part of the Town Deal Board, we were asked to bid in one of 3 rounds. The first one would have been, it was at the end of this month or next month, I think. Then there's a further one in October, and then another one in January time, I think it was. And with the board deliberately took the date to push back to the second round, because what we didn't want to do was rush into anything. We didn't want to rush into anything kind of half-cocked, but at the same time it gave us the opportunity to take a look at what those councils that were applying for the first round, to see what type of schemes and what ideas that they were coming with, because it may, well, as we all know, sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Other people might have come up with a good idea that we might be able to shape that might fit Hartlepool. But just so you're aware of that, that's all. We've decided to hold back on putting the initial bid in. I've got Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm going to start off with the same as everybody else, that yes, 25 million isn't a lot, but it is a good step in the right direction. And I do realise that, we have buildings in the town centre that are in very bad state of repair, and yes, we do need to address them. But I would rather hope, as the plan evolves, that we would have at least some focus on smaller independent Hartlepool businesses, whether that's supporting newer businesses or supporting existing business or stimulating new ones. I would just hope we could be mindful that, solid local businesses have got to always be an asset for our town. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So the recommendations then are for us to endorse the Town Deals Board as in Appendix 1, approve taking the role of the lead council, note the capacity funding, and note the involvement of the High Street Task Force. Is everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
And the next item then does fall within it is an exempt item, so unfortunately we will need to move to a closed session. So I've got Councillor Young proposing that. Could I get someone to second it, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Brewer. Thank you to members of the public who joined us for this meeting so far. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again another time.